I guess I'm going to get started because we have an hour together. And I want to start off, well, by introducing myself. My name is Anne-Marie Cech. I am a program manager at the CHSSN for Early Childhood, Youth, and Families. And I am super excited to welcome our guests today from the Observatory des Tout-Petits. This is the first collaboration of which others will come. So this is very exciting. And they have an excellent presentation for you today on how little ones are doing in Quebec. So that will be starting shortly. I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping guidelines, give you guys a few guidelines before we start. For those of you who are used to the Zoom platform, but less used to the Zoom webinar platform, you might notice that it's a little bit different. Some of the differences that you'll notice is you don't have the option to open your camera or to unmute yourself. That's normal. And however, if you do want to communicate with the group or with the panelists that we have today, you can do so using the chat or using the Q&A functions that are at the bottom of your screen. You also have the option of raising your hand. That's a little icon at the bottom. If you raise your hand during the question and answer period, that's going to give us an indication that you would like to be unmuted and ask your question verbally. So the presentation will last about 45 minutes, and we will have a 10-minute period for questions and answers. So please keep your questions for that moment. What else do I want to say? You are welcome to ask your questions in French or in English. And just a little technical component, you may notice between the slide that's on your screen and the video of me, there are two little gray dashes. If you put your cursor on those dashes, it allows you to play with the size of the speaker versus the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation. So that's just a little trick so that you have a better view of the presentation when that's going on. So that's what I wanted to say for that. I do want to take a moment to recognize that although this CHSSN event is online, we are each of us located on unceded Indigenous lands. I would like to acknowledge the Huron-Wendat Nation as the custodians on which some of us gather today, including myself. CHSSN acknowledges historical and ongoing injustices that Indigenous peoples endured and will continue strengthening our respectful relations with Indigenous communities throughout our network. Without further ado, I will now be presenting our two panelists for today. So first off, Fanny Desgenais is the director of the Observatoire des Tout-Petits, a project of the Lucie and André Chagnon Foundation, whose mandate is to communicate the status of knowledge in order to inform decision-making in the area of early childhood in Quebec, so that every little one has access to the conditions that ensure the development of their full potential, regardless of where they are born and grow up. As part of her duties, she orchestrates communication campaigns targeting decision makers, influencers, and the general public, so that early childhood occupies a more prominent place both in the media space, in government priorities, and at the institutional level. She is also regularly called upon to collaborate with various media outlets and to give conferences in order to raise awareness of the status of well-being of the little ones in Quebec. Working for 14 years in the social and health field, Ms. Desgenais has extensive experience in communication, social marketing, and management. Her professional career led her to work for the Cabinet de Relations Publiques Nationales as a communications consultant, before serving for 11 years as director of Équilibre, an expert organization on the issues of weight and body image. These experiences led her to manage the development and implementation of societal campaigns, as well as the deployment of intervention programs at the provincial level in schools and communities. She also teaches social marketing to master's level students at the School of Public Health of the Université de Montréal. So welcome, Fanny. I will now be introducing our second speaker, Valérie Perrault. Valérie worked in perinatal care for 20 years as a midwife. She spent nearly 10 years at the Maison Bleue, where she developed expertise with families in situations of great vulnerability, including families seeking asylum and refugees. She has also worked as a project manager for the Ordre des Sages-Femmes du Québec and the Canadian Association of Midwives, National Aboriginal Council of Midwives, on projects related to Indigenous communities. For 14 years, she has been involved in training, both in continuing education with her peers and in the clinical supervision of health science students. She completed a master's degree in public health in 2012 with field research in Mali related to maternal health. She is currently a writer analyst at the Observatory des Tout-Petits. Welcome, Valérie. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us. And I'm giving it up to you now.
Hi, everybody. I'm very pleased to be with you this morning with my colleague, Valérie. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, for the nice invitation. So just before Valérie's presentation, I'm going to say a few words about the Early Childhood Observatory. I think many of you know us, but maybe some of you don't. So you will have a little more information about us. So as Anne-Marie mentioned, our mission is to communicate the current state of knowledge in order to promote informed decision-making on the subject of early childhood in Quebec. So we are talking about children from pregnancy to 5 years old. And the Early Childhood Observatory is a project of Lucie and André Chagnon Foundation that you may know. And our goal is to ensure that every child living in the province has access to conditions that will enable them to develop their full potential, regardless of where they were born or growing up. So more concretely, the observatory does not produce data or conduct research. Our team works with existing data and studies. Our mandate is to monitor the current situation of young children in Quebec by compiling and analyzing the most rigorous informative data and knowledge available on the subject of early childhood from pregnancy to 5 years old. And with those data and knowledge, we inform decision makers, key influencers, and citizens by documenting and communicating information on issues that threaten early childhood development, as well as collective measures that could alleviate them. So all of those actions are aimed to spark constructive dialogue that could lead to positive change for the development of little ones. So the observatory does not make recommendations. It's very important to understand that, but it communicates the state of knowledge in order to inform the debate as well as decision making. So if you have any question about the Early Childhood Observatory, I'll be very happy to answer them at the period of questions. And for now, I will give the floor to my colleague Valérie, who will share with you data taken from our last reports. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fanny and Anne-Marie, for the presentation or for inviting us this morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me know if there's any problems in terms of seeing my slides, Anne-Marie and Fanny. So we're going to be talking today to you about some data that's from 2 publications that came out in the last year. So, and this will help us to tell you both how our little ones are doing and also how are ways that we can foster their development. So as Fanny was mentioning, in terms of the data that we collect and the things that we do, the Observatory publishes a lot of different information, collects a lot of data, and then helps to translate it in different ways. And some of the ways that it does this, that the Observatory does this, is that it will take what you could consider on the left-hand side of the slide are these kind of snapshots. So annual portraits that come out answering
Excuse-moi,
two main...
Valérie.
Oh, excuse-moi, oui.
Désolée de t'interrompre. On ne voit pas le PowerPoint. En tout cas, moi, je ne le vois pas.
Vous voyez pas le PowerPoint?
Moi, je le vois. Est-ce que dans le chat, can the audience please let us know if they see it? People can see it.
Ah, OK.
Marie-Claude, est-ce que ça va
Yes,
aussi?
yes, oui, je peux le voir. Yes, I
Thank
can
you.
see it.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. So sorry, everybody. It's some of the challenges of not being in person, but I'm glad that it's okay in terms of the visual supports. So what we were talking about is the different types of publications. And so on the left-hand side of the slide, you see what I was mentioning in terms of the annual portraits that come out and that answer 2 main questions that we ask ourselves. Alternating years. So one year, how are little ones doing? And then the other year, we tend to look more in terms of their environments. So the one that you see at the forefront is the one we're going to be focusing on today. And you can see from the image on the cover image is that it's the one that came out actually in the fall of 2021. And so as I'll go into it actually a little bit more when I'm talking about that portrait, but you can see it's the one, the image where you have the little mask on the bunny's face. And on the right-hand side, that's where you have what we call our special reports. And in those special reports, we dig deeper in terms of specific issues. And so those are some examples of publications that have come out looking into more specific issues, such as quality of educational childcare services. And on the furthest right, you're going to see the publication actually that we're going to be talking about today, some data that's taken from this publication about how to foster little ones' developments, focusing on 3 main aspects that we're going to be discussing. So to begin with, here's some aspects in terms of the portrait of 2021. So like I said, this is more of a type of snapshot of what are collecting all the most recent data available to us. So sometimes it can be from the last year, sometimes the data can date back from 2015 or 2016, but we're always trying to integrate the most recent data available. And in this last portrait, we a lot of the big surveys they were done before the pandemic, but we did try to include in that portrait lots of data that we could collect that is emerging in terms of the impact of the pandemic. And so at the end, you will have all the links in terms of being able to access those publications that are currently being translated as well. And so there's blurbs each time if there's specific research that has come out in terms of impact of the COVID pandemic in terms of how are little ones doing. And there's 4 main sections, and we're going to focus on 3 of those blocks in particular. Brush, very quickly, we have some data that we wanted to share for pregnancy, but we're not going too much into that. Briefly also in terms of physical health, but also we're going to focus more in terms of mental health and development. But if you want more information, you'll be able to look at that publication in its entirety. So in terms of pregnancy, the main data that we wanted to share with you was some concerning data in terms of the impact of intimate partner violence and how many women, unfortunately, have experienced this from the data come out in 2018, showing that close to one woman out of 10 had experienced this type of violence in the perinatal period, which goes up to the 2nd birthday of the child. And in terms of what are the impacts, not surprisingly, a very large number of mothers reported that they were feeling very high levels of stress when they were experiencing these types of violence, as we can understand. And actually, it's important to keep in mind that this is an issue that impacts as well single parents, as intimate partner violence tends to increase also even when separation occurs. And unfortunately, again, speaking, so you in the report, you're going to see this little icon in terms of, as you see in the lower right corner, representing the impact of the pandemic each time when there's information on our slides regarding that. But so what the emerging data has shown is that there's been an increase both in Quebec and across the world in terms of intimate partner violence related to the pandemic. Moving on now in terms of a couple data to do with physical health. The ones we wanted to specifically share with your audience today was some data regarding physical activity and screen time. And this is from a research that came out a number of years ago already, but it's the most current one that we have. And what this showed is that there's a large number of children that don't respect the physical activity guidelines as set out by the Canadian Pediatric Association, and a majority actually who don't respect the screen time guidelines in terms of the same organization. So, and in terms of the effect of the pandemic is that both those things were actually affected. So increase of screen time, decrease of physical activity, and there's been also other impacts as well. So there's been impacts in terms of more sedentary activity. That makes sense with the decreased physical activity. There's been also a decrease in the quality of diet that has emerged both here and worldwide. There's some studies showing that there's been increased food insecurity, particularly for low-income households. So one of our mandates at the Observatoire is that it's very important for us to not just be sort of bringers of bad news. We want to make sure that we're talking about issues of concern, but we're also talking about what are possible solutions. And so there's many that we wanted to share. In terms of, if we look at physical health, you'll be able to look at our report in terms of recommendations, or not recommendations, sorry, possible solutions for pregnancy. But in terms of physical health, there's many different things that we can do that can help to promote the health of our little ones. And so what are some of those different solutions we can have at various levels? So it could be at the broader level, national, provincial level. You can have the taxation of sugary drinks, for example, that can help to this is something that's done internationally and that's been under study for a while already in Quebec. You can have also the integration of certain frameworks such as the Gazelle and Pumpkin framework in educational childcare services that can have, it's a very, as many of you are I'm sure very familiar, it's a broad framework that touches many aspects, but its goal is really to help to optimize the healthy environments for young children by having physical activity, adequate play spaces, having nutritional snacks. So all of that has is a very interesting framework that many educational childcare services are using. And in terms of promoting their physical health, we have to think about the ways that we can help them to increase their physically active lifestyle. And that can be done on a municipal level, for example, where you can have safe infrastructures that encourage play. There can be ruelles vertes, green alleys that are available in different areas and different neighborhoods. So that is a very important level as well that's important to keep in mind. We already talked about the Gazelle and Pumpkin, this broad-ranging framework, that touches not only on nutrition, but also touches the physical aspect as well. And if we look at a last piece, and there's many different solutions, but these are just some highlights in terms of healthcare. There's some innovative clinics that are offering perinatal, social pediatrics clinics, so offering greater access to a variety of health professionals and medical care as well. So it's a holistic approach, and this helps to decrease the barriers that can exist in terms of our vulnerable clientele. It can help to detect early if there's any issues as well. And it helps to reduce or eliminate stressors that can compromise a child's health and well-being. So moving on now to mental health. So what we found actually from research is that there's more children than we realize, more little ones than we realize that have mental health issues, such as the ones listed on the slide there. So anxiety, depressive symptoms, and this is a fairly recent data, as we can see, 2019, 2020. And so what are the different types? You can see some listed there: social phobia, separation anxiety, generalized anxiety, and depression. And this is a more recent information that is emerging. It used to be thought in the general public that this is not something that affected small children, but more and more we're becoming aware that our little ones can also be prey to some of those issues that can affect them as well. And that's of particular concern too, because as we know, children, in terms of even expressing their emotions and expressing their feelings, it can be very challenging. So perhaps this goes quite underrated as well. And emerging data internationally and locally and nationally tells us that there's been a huge impact in terms of mental health for everybody, but actually our little ones have been the ones who have been most affected in terms of their mental health during the pandemic. And so there's been documentation of lots of impacts in terms of increase of symptoms of anxiety and depression and increase of problems in terms of behavioral disorders. And there's been, unfortunately, as well, a decrease in terms of both quantity and quality of sleep. And there's been a decrease also in capacity of attention. And so the what's coming out is that it's sort of, and you can see it's sort of related, this, our icon in terms of the pandemic, representing the pandemic is there, but the research shows that it's this accumulation of sources of stresses in family that appears to contribute to mental health problems in children. And we'll talk about that more in the next section of the presentation. But basically, social isolation is linked to greater risk of depression, anxiety disorders. And this happens during the period of isolation, but it can also happen many years later. And it seems to be that it's not so much the intensity of the isolation, but it's the duration of the time period that it lasts that seems to have an effect in terms of mental health. So again, don't want to be just harking on concerning issues. What are possible solutions? And so this is a diagram that maybe some of you are familiar with, a sort of ecosystemic approach, we could say, where we can see our little one is at the very center of this image. And then there's all these different concentric circles that are around this child. And so we can see on the right-hand side of the slide, there's all the stimulation that arise from the different environments and that can help those little brains that are so malleable and that do so much growing in those first couple of years. And so if there's adequate stimulation, supportive stimulation, quality stimulation, all of those things that can help to stimulate the brain development. And also in terms of interactions, those are very, very important at all different levels. So with the family, of course, and then with neighbors and friends and community. So all these circles around the child at the very center. And so keeping that in mind, what can we do? So the first circle around the child is, of course, the family. And so making sure that we're putting everything in place so that families can have the most adequate environments, the most harmonious environments. So reducing stressors, reducing barriers to affordable housing, having outdoor public spaces where they can play, having, and not only to play, but also for parents, it can help to reduce social isolation because it's a place where you can socialize with other parents. Having ways also where we can have address issues in terms of family, work and study balance, because we all know, and we're going to talk about that as well a little bit later, but that has a big impact in terms of the stress that parents feel. And offering assistance in terms of helping them to develop healthy lifestyle habits. So, and parenting resources, those are all very, very important, such as the Nobody's Perfect program or different programs that are supported. In terms of educational environments, there's also, if we move on to that sphere, there's the many things that can be done in terms of improving these environments. So ensuring that there's good quality services, educational services that are available at all levels for all children, reducing barriers if, for example, language is an issue, having information available in various languages, making sure that there's adequate training and ongoing training also for both healthcare and social service providers regarding whatever negative attitudes can exist in terms of families that might face additional challenges. And reducing barriers also in terms of screening, diagnosing, and obtaining treatment. So there's all sorts of initiatives at the moment in terms of trying to reduce those barriers. But right now we do know that there's still many issues in terms of waiting lists to access mental health services. And there's different ways that we could help to reduce those barriers. Like we touched on those a little bit, but making sure also that for those facilities that there's also access to interpreters and that healthcare workers are trained and so on. So that's the actually development, that green section here. So we're doing some last minute translation. So in terms of vulnerability, I'm sure this audience is very familiar with the definition that is used, but basically when we're talking about vulnerability specifically in this portrait, we're talking about vulnerability in terms of entering kindergarten. So this is vulnerability as defined in the Quebec Survey of Child Development in Kindergarten in 2017. And in this, they were evaluated by their teachers upon their entry in kindergarten. And they were found to be vulnerable if they were vulnerable in at least, if they were part of the 10%, which had the lowest scores in one domain. And there's 5 of those domains. And so it was found in the latest data from 2017 that more than a fourth of kindergartners were vulnerable in at least one domain. And this seems to be an issue where inequality plays out as well, because there's issues in terms of more vulnerable children being found in families that have a lower level of education and in more disadvantaged neighborhoods as well. And we also find that some of our children that have other factors, for example, boys as opposed to girls, so boys have higher levels of vulnerability in one domain, and then children who are the youngest in their cohort as well were found to be more vulnerable, and children whose mother tongue is other than French or English, or those that were born outside of Canada. And as of interest to people attending this webinar, they also found in this research, and I'm sure you're familiar with this data already, but that the children whose mother tongue is English were more vulnerable in at least one domain than those that their mother tongue was French, and you can see the comparison there. And so coming back to what are issues in terms of the development with pandemic, so there's been issues raised by our speech and language specialists that children wearing masks in childcare facilities could have an impact in terms of both language development and social emotional development. And so this is not to say we're not going against the recommendations from public health experts that say that still, nevertheless, it's better for children to be masked and their caregivers to be masked in order to prevent the transmission. But it's just to keep in mind upon entry into school in particular, when the children of this cohort will be entering, they might have more issues in terms of language development. And in terms of speaking to this a little bit as well, so in terms of pandemic, so the research is still emerging. So there is currently an American study that's under review at the moment that is showing an association with some increased verbal, motor, and cognitive delays in children that have been born during the pandemic, and with these effects being more pronounced in low-income households. But also we also have a bit of information from other pandemics, such as the SARS epidemic, that seem to show similar findings as well. So again, let's talk about solutions. It's always important to keep that in mind. So there's many different things that can be done. And so if we want our little ones to be able to develop optimally, it's important to intervene early. And so that's one of the objectives of the Agir Tôt program that has been rolling out by the Ministry of Health and Social Services. And so its goal is to detect vulnerabilities and developmental delays in children as early as possible in order to provide a rapid, coordinated response. And so we have to keep in mind that that's one piece, but there's also early detection is also a shared responsibility, and it should be shared among various, all the actors that are around little ones, including educators and parents. So if screening tools can be shared, this will very much help as well. And there's from the INES, the Institut National d'Excellence en Santé et Services Sociaux, they put out a report showing that they're recommending that health and social services establishments ensure that parents of children that very young children, so 5-year-olds with ADHD symptoms or ADHD-like difficulties, have access to parent training programs. So programs that have been validated and evaluated before they're even offered pharmacological interventions. And in terms of taking the needs of minorities into account, this is also an important component. So there's the well-known Bright Beginnings program, which is an approach that helps to improve the well-being and academic success of English-speaking children and youth in Quebec, 0 to 17. And the success that was achieved has been achieved by many organizations supported by this Bright Beginning programs. It helped them to create 57 new programs and services that are specifically designed to reach out to English-speaking children and their parents. So now moving on to our second part of the presentation. And so I finished the snapshot part where I was sharing with you some data in terms of the portrait. Excuse me. Now I'm going to turn to the second part, which is taken from our special report on the importance of the environment on our little ones. And for us to understand better the different stages of development when children enter kindergarten, excuse me, we need to look at what has marked their lives, starting from pregnancy up until the point that they start school. So there's many factors that are at play. There's biological factors, of course, but there's also early experiences that will mold and help to impact their development. And there's going to be also the support and the stimulation they receive in the various environments that they are in. That's also going to impact their development. And so we started having, over the years, seeing the data coming out in terms of where there are issues and where there can be barriers. We started working at the Observatory with different experts to try to answer some questions about what are the experiences and the conditions that are the most crucial for early childhood development. And most importantly, what can we do to ensure that every child is able to fully benefit from everything school has to offer? And it's those questions that we had in mind when we turned to a group of expert researchers, and they helped us to cross-analyze data from the two big surveys. So the first one I alluded to already, the one that is looking at the vulnerability of children and entering kindergarten, but there's also another one that you're familiar with, I'm sure, the Quebec survey on the preschool path of kindergarten students. And cross-analyzing those two big surveys, our experts came out with 3 elements that play a key role in early childhood development, and those are quality, stability, and continuity. But before we look into those more specifically, they also looked at what's considered protective factors and risk factors. So I'm sure many of you are very familiar with these concepts, but just to brush on very quickly. So there's many different factors that can be protective. So we can see in that illustration, the child is at the very very central, of course, playing with her blocks there on the floor. But all those different environments, that if they can become protective factors to help to foster a little one's development. So for example, having stable caring relationships and access to municipal infrastructure and support from other adults in their lives. And we're going to touch on those when we're talking about quality. But we also have negative risk factors, so negative repercussions. So they can also affect the development of little ones. And as educators and professionals involved with little ones, I'm sure this is of no surprise to you, but there are certain risk factors listed on the slide there that can become real risk factors for children. And so we're talking about, for example, neglect and high levels of parental stress, or being exposed to conflict in the home. All of these things can become negative risk factors for children. And it's sort of the issue that it has a cumulative effect. And so if we think about it, it's sort of like all these factors combine, both the protective factors and the risk factors combining together, all of them. And if there's too many on one side, well, we hope it's on the side of protective factors, it tips the scale more in terms of resilience and decreasing vulnerability. On the other hand, if we tip the scale more on the other side, there's too many risk factors adding up in the life of a little one, then it can help to tip it more in terms of vulnerability and affect the development trajectory of our little one. And so looking more specifically in terms of the 3 elements, so from the data that we talked about, there are these 3 elements that came out in terms of the quality and stability of the environments that our young children are growing up in, but also the aspect of continuity, that there be continuity across those different environments. And we're going to touch briefly upon each of those elements. So in terms of quality of environment, what are we talking about? We're talking about children being able to be emotionally and physically safe, so that they're in a caring environment where there's adults in their environment that are responding to their needs appropriately and quickly, and where they're safe from both psychological and physical injuries, so that they can grow up safely and in security. And it also relates to the aspect of stimulation being provided that is appropriate to the development of a child's level as well, to the stage of development. So having books and having educational toys and equipment to play outside and so on. And when we speak of quality, we also involve many different aspects to do with the child's environment, which are listed here on the slide: housing, social support, community resource. And we're going to look at touch on some of those aspects in the next slides. And by the way, if you guys can let me know when there's 5 minutes left. I think maybe you're coming up to the time, huh? I'll keep going for now, but okay. So in terms of quality of housing, so what do we mean? Actually, well, we can define it with the opposite as well. So if it's unsuitable housing, it's going to be housing that's noisy, overcrowded, has excessive coming and going, and in some cases can have mold or other issues. And so the data from 2016 showed that many children, unfortunately, are living in unsuitable housing. So about 1 in 7 are living in unaffordable housing, and 1 in 8 in housing that is not large enough across Quebec. And that has an impact in their child development as well, because we found that children have better school outcomes if they live in suitable housing. Quality of social support is also very, very important. So having a strong support network can help to mean that you are less vulnerable when you're in terms of the domains of development. And the research that has come out, though, the most recent data we have found that 1 out of 5 parents didn't have anybody that they could really turn to on a regular basis if they needed support. And that is of concern, of course, knowing that has such an impact. And again, the impact of the pandemic, we can only imagine that this could have had an impact more in increasing social isolation. In terms of family environment and the balance between family, work, and study, that can be a major source of stress for parents. And if they're feeling very stressed from trying to juggle those responsibilities, they can have more of a tendency to become angry on a daily basis, raise their voice, or lose patience. And that can mean that they can feel less effective in their role as a parent as well. And there's a gender gap there. We found that there's 40% of moms who are finding that they have a very difficult work-life balance, and so this resulting in very high levels of stress compared to fathers. And again, pandemic kind of footnote, we can imagine this has had even more of an impact and probably more gender gap in terms of that as well, but that they're in terms of trying to balance remote work and remote school, or with the school closures and so on, have been lots of issues there. In terms of quality of educational childcare services and early childhood development, there's also lots of research showing that that has a big impact, the quality of the service that a child finds himself in or herself. So there was a research done in Montreal recently that found that children in low-income families who attended an educational childcare facility or a pre-K during their early years, they were less likely to be vulnerable in 2 or more domains than those that did not attend educational facilities. And we speak of quality, we're also talking about quality of interactions between parents and the educators and the teachers. That is a very important component as well. So, and the quality of the interaction seems to be very much linked also in terms of the training of the educators. So both with the parents and and the educators, but also interaction. Also, the quality of education has an impact in terms of quality of interaction between educators and the little ones, where they're going to be more responsive to their needs, interact more, and offer better personal care. And as you can see on that image, basically, there is a higher proportion of qualified personnel. So in the CPEs, or Centre de Petite Enfance, the early childhood centers, with 85% of them having a higher proportion of trained personnel in those facilities. In terms of quality of community resources, that also has a very huge impact. So we're talking about libraries, we're talking about Maison de la Famille, family houses, or other community organizations working with families and little ones. And so they also have a very important role. And we can see basically on that image that there are more vulnerable children, as we talked about, that are rarely or never visited a library. So actually more than a third of them are vulnerable in the component that rarely or never attended a library. And so we have to think about reducing barriers there in terms of access. And what do we mean by stability? We're talking about constancy, predictability of a child's social, emotional, physical environment. And as all of the audience, I'm sure, is very well familiar, children thrive on routine. They need structure, they need routine. And so this is something that can be very, very securing for them, very comforting for them. So they thrive on that. And change, of course, is part of life. It's not to deny that. But again, it's sort of this accumulation. If there's too much of it, that it can become stressful for children. So we can think about, again, we've got our image from the pandemic. So of course, there's been also an impact in terms of that, which has caused lots of changes in all of our lives and also in our little ones' lives, with school closures, daycare closures, or periods where you have to be in isolation and so on. And so that has had an impact in terms of their interactions with their peers. There's been additional stress for parents as well in terms of loss of revenue or work, and increasing food insecurity in some cases. And in terms of continuity, we're talking about in that piece, the final piece, we're talking about that there's consistency between the different environments, for example, between home and childcare. If there's a good relationship and good communication between parents and educators, it helps to improve continuity. And when we're talking about continuity, a place where it's very important as well is the transition between childcare and school. So this is a very important transition for little ones. And so it could be helpful, for example, to set up practices that help this transition. And what we see in this image is that there's a greater proportion of our CPEs, more than one quarter, that participate in discussions and planning with schools. So they seem to be more involved in terms of that transition. And in terms of providing continuity in the community, when we speak of that, there's many different ways that we can help to foster that people feel part of a community, they feel part of a larger community. So on a community level, what can be done? Well, many things actually. You can have organizations that help support, for example, recent immigrants to improve their social support. You can have different programs that help to promote family stability. You can have initiatives on a neighborhood level that help to provide, to improve perception of safety and so on. And you could help to develop tools to encourage communication between environments to help transition. And so to conclude, the key message is that if we improve collaboration between all the different actors, it can make a difference in our little ones' lives. And collaboration can happen on many different levels, like we talked about. It can be between parents and educational services by having good communication, providing support by sharing resources and documents, and perhaps even keeping in mind different literacy levels and languages if needed, something to keep in the back of our mind. And there's ways that we can also encourage parent participation in activities and management, for example, in committees, parent committees or boards and so on. And we can also have better collaboration between educational services and the health and social services network. More and more, we're talking about the importance of breaking down silos and working together. So that's an important piece to keep in mind going forward. And this can be done by encouraging interactions and developing a consistent approach. And lastly, collaborations need to happen at the broader community level. And this is one of the reasons that many public policies are in place in Canada and specifically in Quebec, so that we can try to level out the playing field for our little ones. And actually, this is the focus. All the public policy is the focus of one of our other publications that came out in the last year, which is a portrait of public policy, because all of these have a huge impact on how our little ones develop as well. And the good news is that a vast majority of Quebecers feel that the dialogue is very important. Dialogue at all levels between school, community, principals, municipal environments, and the health and social services network. We all need to be talking to each other more, and today is one of those examples, a very good opportunity. So this has been a quick overview of how our little ones are doing and how we can help them to develop as best they can. If you'd like to know more, I encourage you to check us out on our different platforms that you can see on the slide there. And as Fanny mentioned earlier, we translate many of our publications, and those three most recent ones that we talked about today, well, two of them today in more detail, the Portrait of 2021 and the Special Report on Quality and Stability, but as well, the last one I was alluding to, the Portrait of Public Policies, are all currently being translated. So thank you very much for your attention, and we'll be very happy to answer your questions. I should maybe stop my slide sharing now so that we can see other people more. What do you think? Should I stop the
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, that's a good idea.
Perfect.
So yeah, so time for questions. So if you want to chat in your questions into the Q&A or the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, Peter, our tech support person, will allow you to unmute and to ask your question.
perhaps you want to help us with the reading some of the questions, if there are some.
Yes.
Anne-Marie.
There was a lot of discussion in the chat, a lot of reactions that you probably didn't pay attention to.
No, unfortunately I didn't. I'm sorry.
Fabulous job, Valérie. Thank you so much. I mean, that was a lot.
I was trying to keep to my time. So.
No, you got it dead on. Like, I mean, yeah, okay. So there's a new message I'm seeing here. Okay, would love to be able to use some of the information graphics in our newsletter. Would this be possible? Yeah, or if people want to, put it on Facebook or anything like that. Do you have any comments related to that? Valérie or
Fanny? Well,
or
I know our infographics are available on the website, but I think I saw one of the comments about the fact that they're maybe not all translated, but as these documents become translated, then we can very easily also keep in mind to make sure that the infographics are translated too.
Okay.
Yes, and I saw that someone asked if the website will be translated. So we are for now studying the possibility to translate some parts of the website, but for sure, every report of the Early Childhood Observatory is translated, and they are all available on the website.
Thank you, Fanny. I also, so there's a question here. Do we know the impact of qualified teachers in our preschool 4-year-old kindergarten versus teachers who are not qualified? I don't know about that one. Does Fanny or?
We don't have any data on this question, but I know that some studies have shown that in Centre de la Petite Enfance,
Early childhood centers, yeah.
Childhood centers, the impact, the quality of the services are higher when the educators are have a technique or a university diploma. Mm-hmm. So, but no data on that specific question.
Thank you. And thank you for the question. We have someone is wondering if this is the first time that the Observatoire has translated information into English.
As I said, all of our reports are translated since the beginning of the Early Childhood Observatory about 6 years ago. But I think it's the first time that we do a presentation with CHSSN network.
And so you guys on the PowerPoint, there were links to your website so people can access it that way. And I saw that Marie-Claude from the Observatoire chatted in that the PowerPoint would be available. So that's something that we're going to send out to everyone at the latest at the beginning of next week. So you'll be able to access the information there. And now here there's another, will the website be available in English in the future? So I think our English speaking community is really appreciating the work of l'Observatoire, and they just want more. So, I mean, is that in the plans, Fanny?
Just a moment, okay. So I was answering a question on the question and answer. So can you just repeat the question?
Yeah. So so someone is asking if the website will be translated into English, if that's part of the plans in the future.
Yes, we are studying the possibility to make a part of it. translate, but it's not, I don't think it will be for this year, maybe in the next years. But as I said, all of the reports are in English, and there are also some sensibilization tools that are available in English, such as some tool to speak to municipal actors, because they can do a lot for little ones, and also some tools to influence decision makers at the government level. So and if you're not sure, you can always write to us. So I can put in the chat our general address, and we will, if you write to us, we will see which one of us is the best person to answer your question.
Thank you, Fanny. And I have a question, and I'm sorry, Valérie, if you touched on this during your presentation, but
No problem.
I was wondering, you mentioned that you use different data sources. Can you speak to some of those data sources that are used to produce the reports?
Well, there's many different ones. Do you want me to go, Fanny, a little bit, or?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah? Okay. So we always try to do the most current, use the most current data available. So in terms of childhood development, the one that is used a lot is the EGDEM. So that our whole chapter on development really touches on that. I'm sorry, I forget the English acronym for it. I had it for my specific slide, but it's not in front of me now. But basically, there was one version that came out, or the first edition in 2012. So this is the survey that's done all across Quebec for the children entering kindergarten. And there was another edition of that came out in 2017. And there's going to be actually one coming out probably in the next year. This will be the third edition of the EGDEM. So that is a very important piece. And there's also many that are from Statistics Canada. So all the data that is in terms of physical activity and screen time, that's all coming from that. And then we work very closely actually with different service providers, including the NSPQ, with the ESQ, and with the Ministry of Health as well, and Social Services. So trying to always compile the most recent data available. I don't know if you wanted to add something, maybe also, Fanny?
Yes, we also have administrative data that are coming from RAMQ. Is it okay in English? RAMQ, okay. Which
I think everyone knows. If you live in Quebec, you know RAMQ. Like I say RAMQ also.
I'm not sure I would be able to say it on the long way, so RAMQ.
Yeah, if someone wants to chat it in, if someone in the audience knows.
Yes, so from RAMQ and also different ministries. So we have some data, administrative data from a family minister, and also from health, of course. And I would say that with administrative data, it allows us to have some data by region.
Region, yeah.
Region, yeah, exactly. So we are actually producing the regional portrait. So we have a first one that is going to be ready at the end of the month. That is the one of Outaouais region. And after that, we are going to produce the other one. So we can maintain the contact so everybody in the network can be informed of those new portraits.
Thank you. And you're reminding me that at CHSSN we also have data, census information data by region, and we have little like longer portraits or like mini portraits of that data. So I'm gonna put that in the chat, and I mean we're closing up very shortly, so it'll be in the email as a follow-up to this event. So I think that'll be helpful for the audience. Maybe putting it in the chat is like, anyway, I'm like, I can't talk and put it in the chat. I'm sorry.
No, I know.
I'm not there
a lot of
yet.
multitasking, yeah.
So I see that Brigitte Lapointe has a comment about needing this kind of information in New Brunswick, and asking if, Observatoire can eventually be helping them out. I know that there are, that Families Canada offers, some information and data that's more, maybe pan-Canadian, which is not specific to New Brunswick, but yeah, sorry, I don't have an answer to that. I don't know, Fanny or Valérie, if you wanna answer that quickly.
It would be great to help to support projects happening in New Brunswick.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We've helped some other observatory that were at the beginning, so it would be a pleasure, of course. And we are jealous on our side of your child protector. We would like to have that in Quebec, so maybe we can exchange experiences around
Awesome.
all of our sources of jealousy.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Jen. Jen put into the chat what my colleague Jen Cook put it into the chat so that some people are saying that they're having trouble finding stuff on our website. So I will. I'll be sending those links. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I was also having a hard time multitasking and trying to find it at the same time. So
yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Anne-Marie, just to tell you about that, it's usually you have to scroll down the page. If you go on a report, Valérie, please translate what I'm going to say.
Ok, c'est bon, vas-y.
Il faut aller sur la version française d'un rapport ou d'un document, puis scroller down la page, et à la fin de la page, c'est là que sont les versions anglaises.
Ah, okay. Marie-Claude is our helper here. So she's explaining that we have to go, if you go on a specific portrait, then you have to click on the version that is there, so the French version. And then at the very bottom, if you scroll down, you're going to be able to connect and see there's going to be a little link to the English one. So it's kind of embedded in the other one. You have to know that little trick.
So we have 1 minute left. I want to say thank you so much to Fanny, Valérie, and Marie-Claude, who's in the background, for this wonderful presentation. I hope that it was enriching for you and that it also enabled you to discover this, phenomenal organization that does so much for our little ones and is willing to work with the English-speaking community. So thank you so much for that. I will be sending you guys, I was going to put it in the chat, but I'm going to be sending, I just wanted to inform you guys of an upcoming event on March 24th and 25th, which is the First School Transition and Child Development Forum. So I'll be sending that along with the follow-up email. So thank you to everyone. It was great to have you here and in large numbers, and looking forward to meeting you all again.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.